So CNN tries to defend Bill Maher and his statements about Islam, and Reza Aslan, a professor of religions, has consistently called him to the floor about his statements. Bill Maher's statements, of course, parrots everything that the government says. The government says Islam is a terror organization, they treat women terrible, and blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. And specifically, they go on to talk about female genital mutilation. Although the United States practices male genital mutilation, which no other white nation practices. There is no male genital mutilation in Germany. And what I mean by that is you call it circumcision. It is male genital mutilation, and only the United States practices it. For an entire country that is not even Jewish at all. And when they tried to discuss female genital mutilation, he pointed out that it is an African custom. It is not a Muslim custom, because there's nowhere else in the religious world of Islam that they practice female genital mutilation. And when he pointed out that Eritrea, Ethiopia, and a lot of the Eastern countries, which are Christian countries, of course, you never hear about that part, that Africa has Christian nations in it, that they practice female genital mutilation because it is the tradition of their tribes. They glossed over that and said, no, it's Muslim. No, it's African. And he's absolutely correct. As a rite of passage for the boys, they practice male genital mutilation, which really, if we're going to talk about Jews, this is where the Jews will get it from. They got it from Africans. They didn't get it from the ancient Hebrews. And I know you're going to say, but it's in the Bible. That didn't happen to the Jews. That didn't happen to the Hebrews. The people calling themselves Jews today rewrote the Old Testament to say that all of this stuff happened to them. It didn't happen to them. And I will say this over and over, and of course people will say that I'm wrong, but I'm not wrong. Go to any professor of religiosity, any masters of divinity, and they will show you that this stuff that we claim is the Old Testament did not happen to the Jews. It happened to other people outside of the Jews. The Jews were very careful history keepers. They kept the history of people. If something interesting happened to Egyptians, they kept it. Ethiopian, well, they didn't. There was no Ethiopian. It was all Egyptian. So if it happened to Egyptians, they kept it. Samaria, they kept it. Hittites, they kept it. Anything, and they were a tiny tribe. So it's like one of those CW TV shows where you have this small town in the middle of nowhere, and every time you look at every episode, there's a brand new festival happening to it. A town of 20,000. Well, where are you getting all these festivals? You don't do anything. You don't have this great a town. You don't have a peach festival, a banana festival, a pecan festival, All Saints Eve festival. I mean, you can't. It's an impossibility because the area that you live in can't have all of these festivals. You can't have a banana festival and a pecan festival in the same town. Can't. Impossible. It's an impossibility that all of this stuff happened to so-called Jews or what we want to term as Hebrews, but what they're doing is putting that on the Jews. Genital mutilation of men and women is an African thing, as a rite of passage for a lot of them. So, and the way the Africans do it has nothing even similar in the Western world. In the Western world, we do it to infants. In Africa, the men are genitally mutilated at the age of like 18, 19, 20, something like that. They're grown people. They're not tiny children. They wouldn't do that to tiny children. Now, the female genital mutilation, it does happen at a younger age, because the point is not a rite of passage. Women don't have a rite of passage. Females aren't considered to be something that needs to pass into adulthood so that they can go out and hunt and capture a wife or whatever they're going to be, whatever the tradition is, why they're having this rite of passage. But the rite of passage really is for the men. It's saying, you've put away your boyish things, now you're going to be a man. We're going to cut off your foreskin. But what they do is, a lot of them tie weights to their foreskin to stretch the foreskin, so they absolutely do not cut any part of the penis off. And it doesn't have the same effect as it does in the Western world, where the circumcision is cut so closely that any foreskin is completely removed. And while we're on the subject, the only reason that the United States practices this is because we had a doctor who was one of those strict religious guys who believed that masturbation was a sin, and he thought that cutting off the foreskin of a boy would stop masturbation. Of course, it does not. It has no effect on that whatsoever. But that's why we have it. And it wasn't all of the United States. It was polite society. So you wouldn't have boys sitting at the dinner table fidgeting with their penises. And of course, that has everything to do with parenting. Okay, Billy, stop messing with yourself at the dinner table in front of the other 20 guests that we have. That's polite society. You don't eat alone. We never did. If we ate alone, that was a weird circumstance. But Bill Maher is trying to place the female genital mutilation on Islam, and it's not. It never has been. Then he talks about women's rights, and he points to Iran and Saudi Arabia. And he says that those are moderate states. So this must be a practice that all of Islam practices. No. In Indonesia, you have already had presidents of the entire nation. The United States still doesn't have a female president of the entire nation. You've already had heads of states, female heads of states in Muslim countries. Everybody keeps the government keeps pointing, oh, look at this area, look at this area, look at this area. That area that we call the Middle East is the aberration of Islam. A lot of the other people, a lot of the other countries that study or adhere to Islam study the whole thing. And the whole thing says you're supposed to be moderate, you're supposed to be compassionate, you're supposed to take care of your poor, you're supposed to be tolerant of other religions, you're supposed to be, it says, literally, everybody keeps saying that, hey, the three, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam came from the same source, and they did. And the Muslims literally copied everything in Christianity that we adhere to, almost word for word. Almost word for word. I know you don't want to hear that. I know that your government has told you that that is not the case, but that is the case. That is the case. So women are not to be mistreated. Women are not supposed to be hated. Women are not supposed to be treated like 12th century property. And all of the other 30 or so Muslim countries adhere to that. It's only Saudi Arabia, which actually has a king and a queen. It's only Iran where you have this religious leader, or Iraq, which also has a religious leader, that you have these extreme versions of Islam. You remember, I have lived in 2 different Muslim countries. I had no problem. I saw no problem. I saw no atrocities. And I lived in these Muslim countries in Africa. I lived in 2 different Muslim countries in Africa. I didn't. Now, they said, the embassy said, don't get married to nobody. Don't marry nobody's daughter. Don't let them do that to you, because you're going to have to convert to Islam. I'm all like, but she's going to be an American citizen and we're going to, no, you can't even leave. That works in other countries. You know, they try and force the daughter onto you. And I got out of several arranged marriages, by the way, in those countries too. They'll try and, in other countries, they'll try and get you to marry their daughter. And then the daughter goes to the United States with you, gets money, and she sends money back home. And then eventually the entire family ends up in the United States. Now, these are people with money, though. You know, I'm not hanging around poor people. So these are the people that you do want. And of course, these are all rich Africans. Be they the Moroccan rich African, which is, they're not really African. They're the Saudi Arabians over in Morocco. They're Arabs. But continuing on, Bill Maher tried to say that Islam mistreats women. That's not the case. And Reza Aslan said this over and over. That is not the case. The other 20 to 30 Muslim countries don't even do this, don't practice any of this. He's repeating exactly what Bush and Obama is saying, word for word. And it's ironic that he's saying what Bush said, because supposedly he hates Bush so much, right? He's a big liberal guy, right? Bill Maher. He's a big liberal guy. And he's going along right lockstep with the government, with Bush, with Obama. Islam is bad. Islam is terrible. Now, is he saying this because he actually believes this, or is he saying this because he's towing the line, right? He wants to stay on the air. They have already come out and said that Obama and his administration, although they pretend that they're going to be all this big transparent administration, is telling people what to say, is telling the media what to say. I'm not a part of them, so I can say what I want to say. Is telling the media, they've already written books about it already, that they call the people in for photo ops. Okay, now you can take a picture of the president. He's all made up. He's sitting in his office. He's smiling. He's in a good mood. Now you can take a picture. If not, all the media get out, and I'll have my own personal photographer take pictures for all of the photo opportunities for the president. You don't see pictures of Obama like you did of Ford, of LBJ, or even Nixon, who hated the media, right? Yeah, I have a political science degree. I know these things before I was born. I know stuff that went on before I was born. Yeah, Nixon hated the press. I believe he even shut down the White House press room and didn't say anything. Obama is even worse. He'll come out, his speaker will completely lie to the press, not answer questions, and tell them exactly what to print. And if they do not print what they want them to print, they will blackball them from the White House. They will blackball the entire news organization that they're from. So if somebody from CBS asks a question that they don't even like, CBS will be blackballed from the newsroom. Bill Maher is repeating exactly. So I'm asking, does he really believe that? Since he's supposedly this religious expert, as an atheist, he's a religious expert. And he went to he even made a movie about it. And Reza Aslan is saying Bill Maher doesn't know what he's talking about. That's not Islam. That's the extremist countries of Saudi Arabia, even Dubai, Iraq, Iran. I don't know what they practice in Palestine, but I believe Palestine don't act like that either. But they're acting like 12th century, with the people walking around covered from head to toe. And when they come to the United States, the stores say, no, you can't come in here like this. And in Europe too, you can't come in here like that. I don't know who you are. I'm talking about the women covered from head to toe. You can't see anything. You can barely see their eyes. And the store said, well, you can't come in here like this. And they try and sue. Oh, she has a religion. Well, that might be the case. She might be religious, but this is my store. This is a private store. You can't come in here covered head to toe. I don't know what the human being underneath all of that looks like. If you rob the place, and that could be a man, if you rob the place, we have nothing to go on. Well, I saw she had green eyes. She had brown eyes. Or the person had green eyes. The person had brown eyes. And the judges have said, yes, private companies, private businesses have the right to refuse service. That is a fundamental right of the free market. You don't have to let everybody into your business. Now, unfortunately, a lot of white businesses before did that to black people just as a whole. All the black, nope, you can't come in here at all. Or, no, we're going to treat you, you're going to pay money the same as a white person, and sometimes even more, but you have to come to the servant's entrance, walk through all of the grit and grime of our warehouse to shop in our store. Yes, that's how black people were treated. And everybody jumped on Ron Paul for saying that he didn't believe the civil rights era was even constitutional, that the Supreme Court and the Congress couldn't tell a private business who they could and could not serve, because that's the whole point of a free market system. And the Constitution says that you cannot do that. You can't tell a business that they can't, because that is telling a specific entity in the United States what they can and cannot do. Because then you could tell people in their own home that they have to let black people in their house. And they knew full well they couldn't do that. But they did it with businesses. Now, had the civil rights not occurred, black people would have been richer. And I've already gone over that. We would have been much richer. We would have been much more independent had the civil rights not occurred. But the courts held for the private business when it came to Islam and the hijab and the burqa, and I don't even know what the full metal jacket it's called. I don't even know what that's called. I didn't deal with that in the countries that I went to. That is something extreme. People think that that's normal. That was not in the countries that I lived in. In fact, they didn't even wear hijabs. The black women didn't wear anything. They wore what everybody else in the entire Western world wore. Just regular clothes. Blouse, jeans, dress. Even the Protestants in the United States dress more like 12th century women than the Muslim countries in Africa that I lived in. Now, of course, people are going to say, well, it's Bill Maher, he's stupid, blah, blah, blah. But he has a national soundboard. He has a national megaphone. If he repeats what the government says, people are going to believe it. And thank God for Reza Aslan. And of course, Reza Aslan has been in trouble with the news for saying truth before. Because the news, of course, is the parrot of the government. And they're saying, at one point, they were saying, you can't say that, you're not a Christian. He wrote something about Christianity. And he says, of course I can say that. I'm a professor of religions. This is what I do. But you're a Muslim yourself. It has nothing to do with it. I'm a professor of religions. I've said before, it's ironic that Iraq and Iran were before the centers, after Egypt was completely raped and pillaged and destroyed. Egypt was a center of learning of the entire world. Yes, in Africa. And this is why a lot of white supremacists try and put Egypt as being a white country, and why they say Egyptians were white. And there's no, Egyptians were brown. No, Egyptians were black. They were my color. I should know that because my people come from that area. We weren't slaves. We weren't from West Africa. A lot of people look at me as, you're black, but you don't look like the rest of the other black people. You don't have a big nose. You don't have big lips. That's because I come from the northeast of Africa. That's where my people come from. I don't know if I'm specifically Egyptian, Eritrean, or what, but I come from that area. We were black. We weren't tanned. We weren't white, like my roommate wants to say. We weren't Irish. He said the Irish founded Egypt. The Irish, who were running around in sackcloth, loincloths, and wolfskins, while Egypt was already old. White people weren't even a consideration back then. We're talking about 20,000 years ago. White people weren't anything 20,000 years ago. Nothing. White and civilization is a new thing. That's because the climate was so terrible. You couldn't have millions of people because people didn't survive. They couldn't live. In Africa, you could live. In Egypt, definitely you could live because you had overabundance. Egypt actually fed the Mediterranean world. Fed. Goods from Egypt were being traded for thousands of years because they had an overabundance of food. And with an overabundance of food, you had a stratification of labor and all the other stuff. So then you had entertainment, you had science, you had logic. Where did the Greeks get their stuff from? And you can go and read this in the Greek philosophies. They got it from Egypt. And in fact, the Greek racist, bigoted population said, you all are teaching that black stuff. The Greeks were very, very open about where they got their stuff from and who the people were. They call the Egyptians black and all of their stuff black. That's the word that they use. Greek variations of the word black. In fact, the word Egypt means black, and it's a Greek word. It's not an African word. They couldn't pronounce the African word for what we call Egypt. They couldn't pronounce the word for the people, the African word for the people that live there. And after Egypt, we have Persia as the center of learning for the world. Scientists from all over the world went there. That's why we use their mathematical systems. They invented the zero. There was no zero before Persia. I'm sure the Egyptians had a zero, but that was all destroyed. All of the knowledge of Egypt was destroyed because of a lot of racism. A lot of Europeans felt that blacks should not have learning and should not have a civilization so vast, so monumental, that in fact the Romans came and destroyed most of the monuments in Egypt because they thought that they were the center of the universe. And they go over to Africa and they see black people running around with huge sculptures, and their quote unquote king is a god. He's not a king. Europe never had that. Europe didn't have people worshiping the king as a god. In Africa, you had that. Why? Because the king could order people to build a monument, and they would build a monument, and the monument would be bigger than anything a human had ever seen before. Clearly, this is the work of a god. This is not the work of just a mere man. And the Romans came and destroyed that. And they put to death all of the scholars. And then you had invasion after invasion after invasion into Egypt, because Egypt had grown lax. They thought that since they were a civilization like the United States, that they were a full-fledged civilization with a complete division of labor, that they could sit on their laurels, and they didn't really need an army, because who would come against Egypt? Well, they had invasion after invasion. They didn't need to have this huge army because Egypt didn't need to invade anywhere else. Everywhere else was terrible. In France, you had to invade. In Germany, you had to invade. Ireland had to invade. Scottish had to invade. England had to invade. The Dutch had to invade because where they lived was awful. Where they lived, you couldn't grow anything but potatoes. You couldn't grow anything but cabbages. They had to invade constantly. People were dying in their hovels. But after that, you have Persia rising to power, and everything that Egypt had already uncovered, already learned, had been burned. Library at Alexandria. Persia was the center of learning, and remained so until this day. As far as their discoveries has remained so. So it wasn't the white scholars, that it wasn't Isaac Newton, and it wasn't all those other people that's already been discovered. Do you honestly think people didn't know what gravity was until a European discovered it? A European who Europe was in loincloths for 20,000 years? Well, we have engineers in Africa creating the Great Pyramid, which they still do not even understand what it's for. It's not a burial tomb. It's something else completely different. Engineers creating monuments, the Great Sphinx. Really? You don't think those people knew what gravity was? Really? You don't think those people knew what sine, pi, and all that? Because that's actually in an Egyptian temple that's dated 10,000 years BC. But of course, we're led to believe that Europeans discovered it. No, even after Egyptians were destroyed, we have Persians, who is the center of learning. And they were the center of learning all the way up until Islam came. And that's the truth of the matter. That's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Bill Maher is trying to parrot what the government is saying. Bill Maher, who tries to appear independent, but he says exactly what Obama tells him to say. And Obama is not a transparent administration. It is the most dictatorial administration that this country has ever seen. And if we're talking about Hillary Clinton coming into power, it's going to be just worse. And I don't think she's going to be able to be president because she has cancer. And everybody keeps forgetting that she has cancer. I don't know how she's being treated. She's not being treated with chemotherapy. She's being treated with something alternative. But she has cancer. I've already reported on it. Thank you for watching the Shikama Live Show.